My daughter handed me the papers at the graveside. Not at the attorney's office, not over the phone, not even in the quiet of the farmhouse after everyone had gone home. She did it right there in the mud, while the men with shovels were still waiting at a respectful distance, and her mother's casket was being lowered into the ground. "Just sign them, Dad," Rebecca said. Her voice was low but firm, the voice she used when she had already decided how a conversation was going to end. "It's a clean offer. Derek and I have been talking to a developer out of Nashville. They want the whole property, all 340 acres. Her husband, Derek, was standing just behind her right shoulder. He had the look of a man who had rehearsed his expression, sympathetic, patient. He kept his hands folded in front of him like a man at a business meeting, not a funeral. "This isn't the time," I said. "There's never a good time with you," Rebecca said. She tucked a strand of dark hair behind her ear. She was 41 years old, and she had her mother's eyes, which made it harder to hold her gaze right then. "Mom is gone, Dad. The farm doesn't run itself. You're 64 years old. You can't manage this place alone. Just take the offer, move into something smaller, and let us handle it." I looked down at the papers. The number at the top was $120,000. I looked back at the hole in the ground where Margaret, my wife of 38 years, was being laid to rest. I signed nothing. I folded the papers and put them in the inside pocket of my jacket. I said nothing else. I just turned and walked back toward the road where I had parked my truck. I heard Derek say something quiet to Rebecca as I walked away. I didn't catch the words, but I heard her laugh. It was a short, dismissive sound, the kind you make when you're talking about someone who doesn't matter. "My name is Walter Gaines. I'm 64 years old. I built my first structure at 18 with salvaged lumber and my father's tools. And for 35 years, I worked as an architect before I came home to help Margaret run her family's farm." Most people in Clanton County saw a quiet old man in a faded jacket who drove a 20-year-old pickup and ate his lunch alone at the diner on Route 9. My daughter saw an obstacle. She was wrong about what I was, and she was about to find out exactly what I had built. The attorney's name was Harlan Pope. He had an office on the second floor of a building on the main square that smelled like pipe tobacco and old leather. And he had handled Margaret's affairs for the better part of 2 decades. I had met him 3 times over the years. He was a tall, thin man who spoke carefully and moved slowly, like someone who understood that precision mattered more than speed. Rebecca and Derek arrived 20 minutes late to the reading. They came in with their coats still on, as if they didn't plan to stay long. Rebecca scanned the room, saw me sitting in the corner chair with my coffee, and gave me a look that I had seen on her face since she was 16. A look that said she had already accounted for me in her calculations and found my presence unnecessary. "Let's get this done," Derek said as he pulled out a chair. Harlan Pope opened his folder without looking up. He read the standard language at the beginning without rushing. Rebecca was looking at her phone under the table. Derek was watching the window. When Harlan reached the section on assets, Derek straightened in his chair. 340 acres of agricultural land assessed at roughly $9 million. The farmhouse and outbuildings valued at another $2.3 million. 2 commercial parcels on the highway frontage that Margaret had held for years worth combined another $4 million. Margaret's investment accounts carefully built over 4 decades amounting to $6.8 million. Derek's knee was bouncing under the table. Then Hartland paused. He turned a page. He set it down flat and smoothed it with his palm before he spoke. "All assets," Harlan said, "including all real property, liquid assets, and business holdings, are to be held in the Margaret Eleanor Gaines Family Trust, to be administered by the sole trustee." Rebecca looked up from her phone. "The sole trustee," Harlan continued, and I noticed the exact moment his eyes moved from the page and landed on Derek, then on Rebecca, then on me, with full and final authority over all distributions and decisions, is Walter James Gaines. The room was quiet for a moment. Then Rebecca's chair scraped back. What does that mean? It means, Harlan said, folding his hands on top of the folder, that your father controls the trust. Every property, every account, every decision about sale, lease, or distribution requires his authorization. She can't have done that. Rebecca's voice had shifted. The measured tone was gone. We talked about this. Mom and I talked about this. She told me, what the trust says, Harlan interrupted gently, is what matters. Rebecca turned to me. Her face was red. You talked her into this. Margaret wrote this trust 7 years ago, Harlan said, and amended it twice in the last 18 months. Mr. Gaines was informed of the final arrangement 2 weeks before her passing. Derek leaned across the table. So, what does Rebecca get? Harran turned another page. Rebecca is the designated beneficiary of the trust. She and any children she may have are the intended recipients of distributions as determined appropriate by the trustee, which is her father. As determined appropriate, Derek repeated. That is correct. Derek looked at me. For the first time since the funeral, he seemed uncertain about the expression he was supposed to be wearing. I kept my face the same as it had been all morning, still patient. I had spent 35 years reading buildings before they were built. I knew how to see what wasn't visible yet. I thanked Harlan, picked up my jacket, and walked out. The first legal letter arrived 11 days later. Rebecca had retained an attorney, a man named Clifton Marsh, who operated out of a big glass building in Nashville, and whose name appeared on billboards near the airport. The letter was thick. It was professionally written. The central claim was that I was suffering from early-stage cognitive decline and was therefore unfit to manage assets of this magnitude. It cited as evidence my erratic behavior and emotional instability following the death of my wife. I read the letter at my kitchen table with my morning coffee. Then I folded it neatly, placed it in the file I had already prepared, and called a man named Roy Dillard. Roy had been my site foreman for 11 years before he retired, and spent 3 years consulting for a private security firm. He was 62, broad-shouldered, and had the kind of quiet competence that never announced itself. I had called him the day after the funeral because I knew my daughter, and I had known Derek for 12 years, and I understood the shape of what was coming. They filed the competency challenge, I said. Expected, Roy said. You want me to move to phase 2? Not yet, I said. Let them think it's working. I want to see how far they'll push. What they pushed to over the next 3 weeks was further than I had anticipated. Derek began showing up at the farm at irregular hours, walking the fences, taking photographs. 2 pieces of equipment from the south barn disappeared. A John Deere tractor worth $60,000 and a hay baler that had been Margaret's father's. When I called the equipment dealer in town, he told me a man matching Derek's description had come in, asking about current auction values for both machines. I didn't call the police. I called Roy. And Roy called his cousin, who ran a security camera installation company in Murfreesboro. Within 72 hours, every Audi building, every gate, and both road entrances to the property had coverage. I had the feeds on my laptop and my phone. I watched from my kitchen in the cottage at the edge of the south pasture, eating my supper, while my son-in-law walked through rooms that did not belong to him. Rebecca called me twice that week. I let both calls go to voicemail. The messages were the same in tone, different in detail. The first was conciliatory. She was worried about me. She just wanted to talk. The second was harder. She reminded me that the competency hearing was scheduled for the following month, and that she hoped I was taking it seriously, because if the court found in her favor, it would be out of both our hands. I called Harlan instead. The tractor and the bore. I said, "I'll draft a demand letter today." Harlan said, "Any unauthorized removal of trust assets is a breach. We can file for an emergency injunction." "Don't file yet," I said. "Mine is documented. I want the full picture first." Heron paused. "Walter, these things move fast. If they're liquidating assets, I know," I said. "I built the timeline. Trust it." The second development came from an unexpected direction. I was at the diner on a Thursday morning when Phyllis Mercer, who had been Margaret's closest friend for 40 years, sat down across from me without being invited and put both her hands flat on the table. "I need to tell you something," Phyllis said, "and I need you to not react while I'm telling it." I set down my coffee cup. Phyllis lowered her voice. "For the past 8 months," she said before Margaret got too sick to leave the house, Rebecca had been visiting the farm every week, which wasn't unusual. What was unusual was what Phyllis had seen on one of those visits when she had stopped by unannounced and found Rebecca at the roll-top desk in Margaret's study with a folder of documents spread open in front of her and a pen in her hand. Margaret was resting. Phyllis said she hadn't been well for weeks, and Rebecca was in there by herself signing things. What kind of things? I don't know exactly, but when I walked in, she gathered everything up very fast and said she was just organizing some paperwork for her mother. Margaret never mentioned it to me, but I know Margaret's signature. I've seen it for 40 years. Phyllis pressed her lips together. What Rebecca was writing didn't look anything like it. I drove home from the diner and sat in my truck in the driveway for a long time. Then I called my old college friend, a man named Gene Alresh, who had spent 30 years as a forensic accountant before retiring to Asheville. I asked him if he'd be willing to take a look at something. "How complicated?" Gene asked. "I don't know yet," I said. "Possibly very. When do you need me?" "As soon as you can get here." Gene arrived on Saturday. He spent 2 days in my kitchen going through every financial document I could locate. Farm accounts, business filings, loan records, equipment leases. He was meticulous and silent, and he drank black coffee and ate nothing until dinner, which was his habit. On Sunday evening, he closed the last folder and looked at me. "There are 3 loans," Gene said, "that I cannot reconcile with any legitimate farm expense. How much combined?" "A little over $400,000. 2 of them were taken against the farm's operating line of credit. One was a personal loan secured against one of the highway parcels." He turned a document to face me. "All 3 are signed in your name." I looked at the signatures. They were close. Careful. Someone had studied my handwriting. When were they taken out? 18 months ago, 14 months ago, and 7 months ago, which was 3 months before Margaret passed. 7 months ago, Margaret had already been too weak to leave her bedroom most days. "Where did the money go?" I asked. Gene pulled out a separate sheet. All 3 disbursements went to a single LLC registered in Tennessee. Highgate Eco and Partners. I knew that name. Dererick had started a horse breeding operation 3 years earlier. It had been losing money since the 2nd month. Margaret had lent him money once openly, which he had never repaid. I had not known about the rest. I sat with that for a moment. Then I thanked Gene and asked him to write it all up and seal the report, until I told him otherwise. The competency hearing was set for a Tuesday. Rebecca had produced an affidavit from a physician named Dr. Elaine Curtis, who stated that she had examined me on 2 separate occasions and observed significant signs of cognitive decline, including difficulty with sequential reasoning, memory gaps, and what she described as paranoid ideation. I had never met Dr. Curtis in my life. I submitted voluntarily to an independent neurological evaluation the week before the hearing. The neurologist was Dr. Marcus Webb, appointed by the court at my request. He spent 3 hours with me. He administered every standard assessment. When he filed his report, it showed that my cognitive functions scored in the top 20% for my age group, and that there was no clinical evidence of any impairment. Dr. Curtis did not appear at the hearing to testify in person. Her attorney submitted a brief explanation citing a scheduling conflict. The judge, a woman in her mid-50s named the Honorable Patricia Dell, read both reports in the courtroom with a stillness that reminded me of the way certain structures hold weight distributed, invisible, absolute. Then she looked up. The petition for removal of the trustee is denied. Judge Dell said, "The petitioner's medical evidence is uncorroborated and contradicted by court-appointed evaluation. Mr. Gaines retains full authority as trustee." Rebecca's attorney started to speak. Judge Dell raised one finger. Furthermore, the judge said, "Given the nature of this filing and the quality of evidence presented, I am ordering a review of the professional conduct of Dr. Curtis. That's all." I drove home along Route 9. The fields on either side were brown and frostbitten in the November light. I stopped at the diner and had a piece of pie. I left a $20 tip because Dorothy, who had worked there for 27 years, always remembered how Margaret liked her coffee. Then I went home and called Roy. Phase 2, I said. Roy had spent the previous 3 weeks identifying the structure of Derrick's debt. It was, as I had suspected, considerable. The Highgate Eco & Partners had defaulted on 2 private loans beyond the ones taken against my farm. One was held by a lender in Louisville, one by a private individual in Memphis. Combined outstanding balance was roughly $280,000, and both lenders were actively pursuing collection. I made 2 phone calls. In both cases, I offered cash today at a modest discount in exchange for a full transfer of the debt note to my holding company, which Roy had incorporated 3 weeks earlier under the name Stonewall Capital LLC. Neither lender hesitated. Nobody loves holding a bad note. Within 48 hours, I owned every dollar my son-in-law owed to anyone except the IRS. On a Thursday morning, I sent a formal letter through Harlan's office notifying Rebecca and Derrick that as trustee, I was conducting a comprehensive audit of all trust assets and had identified potential irregularities in certain loan documents bearing signatures attributed to Walter James Gaines. The letter stated that pending the outcome of the audit, I was exercising my authority as trustee to reclassify the farmhouse where Rebecca and Derrick had been living rent-free for the past 2 years as a restricted trust asset, and that occupancy by non-desated parties would require a monthly lease agreement at fair market rate, retroactive to the date of Margaret's passing. The fair market rate for a 4-bedroom farmhouse on 340 acres in Clanton County was $4,200 per month, retroactive to 8 months ago. Derrick called me 40 minutes after the letter was delivered. I answered, "This is insane," Derrick said. His voice was tight. "You can't charge us back rent on a family property." "The trust can," I said, "and does. The retroactive amount is $33,600, due within 30 days. We don't have that." "I'm aware," I said. "I also want to discuss the $46,000 in loans taken against trust assets in what appear to be unauthorized transactions." The line was quiet for 4 seconds. "Those loans were legitimate," Derrick said. Margaret approved them. In writing. Another pause. "We can work this out," he said. "I'm available Tuesdays and Thursdays," I said. "Bring an attorney." He hung up. Rebecca didn't call. She went to the internet instead. That evening, she posted a video from what I recognized as the farmhouse living room, though she had moved the furniture to make it look smaller and more sparse. She was sitting on the floor, her back against the wall, wearing no makeup, her hair loose. She had staged it carefully. She looked exhausted. She looked like a woman who had been wronged. She told her audience, 12,000 followers she had built over years of posting about farm life and home renovation, that her father had changed since her mother died, that he had become cold and erratic and punishing, that he had locked her out of her childhood home and was threatening her with debts that didn't belong to her, that the man she had grown up loving was gone, replaced by someone she didn't recognize. The comments poured in. They always do. I watched the video in my kitchen. I watched it twice. Then I turned off my phone and went to bed. I slept well. I always sleep well. I learned long ago that worry is just anxiety, wearing a productive hat, and it isn't. The foundation either holds or it doesn't, and you know which before you leave the site. The next morning, I drove to the South Barn. Roy was already there with two of his former colleagues. They spent the morning going through the equipment inventory against the original insurance documentation. The John Deere tractor and the bore were still missing. We also found that a set of antique hand tools that had belonged to Margaret's grandfather, appraised at $12,000, logged in the trust inventory, had been removed from the cabinet, where they had hung for 60 years. Roy photographed the empty hooks. He said nothing. He didn't need to. I called Jean. "The report," I said. "Is it ready?" "It's been ready for a week," Jean said. "Send it to Harlan." Heron filed a criminal complaint with the Clanton County Sheriff's Department and simultaneously forwarded the forensic accounting report to the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation's Financial Crimes Unit. Signature forgery on loan documents exceeded the threshold for state-level felony fraud. The amount involved triggered additional federal consideration. I did not tell Rebecca this was coming. I did not announce it. I let Tuesday arrive. On Tuesday morning, 2 investigators from the TBI knocked on the farmhouse door. Derek answered. I know this because Roy's camera caught the whole thing from the gate. Derek let them in. Rebecca came downstairs in a robe. The investigators were in there for just under 2 hours. When they left, they had a box of documents, 2 laptop computers, and a phone. That afternoon, Rebecca called me 11 times. I answered on the 12th. "Dad?" Her voice was different. All the performance was gone. What was left was something raw, and I recognized it because I had heard it once before when she was 9 years old and had broken a window with a baseball and stood in the kitchen, not knowing whether to lie or tell the truth. She had told the truth that day. "Dad, you have to tell them it was a misunderstanding. The loans. Derek handled all of that. I didn't know about the specifics. I trusted him. Do you," I asked, "have that in writing anywhere?" Silence. "Derek kept the records," she said. "I signed some things he put in front of me, but I didn't know they were." She stopped. "Rebecca," I said, "anything you tell me right now, I'm going to have to report to our attorneys." "He did this to us," she said. "He spent the money on those horses and they all died, and he just kept going back to the well. He told me you had approved it. He showed me papers. Were the papers the ones with my signature?" A long silence. "I want to tell you something," she said, "and I need you to just listen. Please, I know I've made mistakes. I know the way I handled the funeral, the way I talked to you. All of it was wrong. But I am not the one who forged those signatures. I am not the one who stole from this family. I believed her partly. I believed that Derek had been the architect. I believed she had let him operate because the money kept the lights on, and the life she wanted funded, and asking questions would have disrupted the comfort of not knowing. That is its own kind of participation, even if it isn't forgery. "What do you want me to do?" she asked. "Tell the truth," I said. "To the investigators. All of it. That's the only currency that has any value right now." She made a sound that I couldn't categorize. "And the farm?" she asked. "The farm belongs to the trust," I said. "Until this is resolved, nothing changes." I hung up. I sat in my truck in the driveway for a long time with my hands on the wheel, looking at the south pasture. The grass was winter gray. The old oak at the fence line looked the same as it had looked when I was younger than Rebecca is now. Margaret had hung a tire swing from that oak the summer we moved in. It had been gone for 30 years. Derek was arrested 6 days later on 2 counts of felony fraud, 1 count of forgery, and 1 count of theft for the missing equipment. His attorney entered a not guilty plea. The prosecutor's file was already thick. Rebecca was not arrested. She retained her own attorney, separate from Derek's, and told investigators everything she knew, which turned out to be more than I had expected and less than I had feared. She had known the money was going to the horses. She had not known the loans were fraudulent. She had signed documents without reading them, which was negligent. But negligence is not the same as conspiracy, and the TBI eventually closed her portion of the case without charges. Derek pleaded guilty 9 months later to avoid trial. He received 4 years in state prison and was ordered to repay the fraudulent loans in full, a debt he would be working off for the rest of his working life if he chose to work at all. The equipment was recovered. The antique tools were found in a storage unit in Nashville, intact. The farmhouse was quiet after that. Rebecca moved out 2 weeks after Derek's arrest and went to stay with a friend in Knoxville. I heard from Phyllis that she had found a job at an architecture firm there, doing project coordination. I thought about that for a moment when Phyllis told me. Then I thought about it again that evening. I spent the winter doing what I had been building toward since the week after Margaret's funeral. I hired a structural engineer named Donna Reyes, who had been one of my students 20 years earlier and was now one of the best in the state. Together we walked every inch of the farmhouse, the outbuildings, the barn, the old equipment shed, the cottage. "What's the end use?" Donna asked, standing in the middle of the barn floor with her clipboard. I handed her a set of rolled blueprints. She unrolled them on a hay bale and studied them for a long time without speaking, which is how I knew she was taking it seriously. What Margaret had drawn, I had found it in the bottom of her cedar chest 6 weeks after the funeral under her wedding gloves. And the letter I had written her in 1987, when I worked away in Atlanta for 4 months, and wrote to her every week because we couldn't afford the long distance calls to a floor plan. She had drawn it herself in her precise looping hand, with measurements marked in pencil and notes in the margins. She was not an architect, but she had grown up on this land, and she understood its bones better than anyone. In the margin at the top of the first page, she had written, "For the ones who need to come home." Margaret had grown up watching her father come back from Korea in 1953 and spent the next 40 years farming the land because the earth under his boots was the only thing that made the noise stop. She had watched 3 of our neighbors' sons come back from Iraq and Afghanistan in pieces that no one talked about publicly. She had wanted to do something. She had just run out of time. The Margaret Gaines Agricultural Healing Center opened 14 months after her death. We converted the barn into the main residential facility. 12 rooms, a shared kitchen, a workshop. The farmhouse became the administrative and therapy center. The cottage, my cottage, stayed mine. The south pasture we planted in spring wheat and divided into working plots, one for each resident. The program was simple. Veterans in transition, 6 months at a time, learning to grow things, fix things, build things. Donna designed the renovations. Roy ran security and facilities. Phyllis organized the kitchen volunteers. We had a waiting list within 8 weeks of opening. I was there every morning at 6 o'clock. I fixed the things that broke. I drove residents to appointments when the van was in the shop. On Thursday evenings, I taught a structural basics class in the workshop because I found, somewhat to my surprise, that people who had spent years in extreme environments were extraordinarily good at understanding load-bearing principles. They already knew in their bodies what it meant to hold weight until you found somewhere to distribute it. I was sitting on the porch of the cottage on a warm evening in late May, 14 months after we opened, when I heard a car on the gravel road. It was a Tuesday, which was not a visiting day, but I didn't get up. The car stopped at the end of the main drive. A door opened and closed, footsteps on gravel. Rebecca appeared at the edge of the cottage garden. She was wearing jeans and a work shirt with the sleeves rolled up. She looked older than the last time I had seen her, which was at Derek's sentencing hearing 7 months ago, where she had sat 2 rows behind me, and we had not spoken. She looked in a way I couldn't immediately name, more like her mother. She stopped at the garden gate. "I heard what you did with the farm," she said. "It's what your mother wanted," I said. "I know." She looked at the main building, at the light in the workshop windows, at the residents on the far side of the pasture finishing the evening work. I read her plans. Phyllis sent me photographs. "Phyllis tells me things too," I said. Rebecca almost smiled. Then she looked at her hands. "I came to say I was sorry," she said. "Not because my lawyer told me to. Not because it changes anything legal. Just because it's the only honest thing I've had left to do for a while." And I kept putting it off. I looked at her for a moment. The oak tree at the south fence was lit gold in the late sun. "Sit down," I said. She opened the gate and sat on the other porch step, not quite beside me, not quite separate. We sat there for a while without talking, which was something we had never been comfortable with, and now managed without effort. The way you learn to do a thing wrong for so long that when you finally do it right, it doesn't feel like anything at all. "The job in Knoxville," I said eventually. "How is it?" "Hard," she said. "I like it. You always were good at organizing other people's plans." She looked at me. "That might be the nicest thing you've ever said to me," she said. "Don't push your luck," I said. She did smile then, for real. And in it, I saw something that had been buried for a long time. Not the girl who had handed me papers at the graveside, just my daughter, sitting in the evening light on the farm where she had grown up, figuring out what came next. I didn't offer her money. I didn't offer her a room. She had arrived on her own, and she would leave the same way. And that was the only version of this that had any future worth building. After another while, she stood up, dusted off her jeans, and looked at the main building one more time. "Can I come back sometime?" she said. "Not to visit, to volunteer if there's something useful I can do." "Thursdays," I said. "Kitchen starts at 8 o'clock. Don't be late." She nodded. She walked back down the gravel path to her car. I watched until her headlights disappeared around the curve at the bottom of the drive. Then I sat in the quiet for a long time, with the sound of the workshop coming from across the yard, and the smell of turned earth in the south pasture, and the last of the light going out of the sky, the way it always did over these 340 acres, slow and complete, leaving behind a darkness that was not empty, but full. The way all things are full when they have finally been built right. Margaret had always said that the hardest thing about growing something was the waiting, not the planting, not the tending, not even the weather. The waiting, the period between when you put the work in and when you find out if it holds. 38 years I had waited with her through everything, and now I was waiting alone. But I had learned from the best engineer I ever knew that a structure is never really finished. It is only ever in the process of becoming what it was designed to be. I was 64 years old. I had work to do. I went inside.